Hi everybody, it's Ann and welcome back to the Blogspot. Now today we're going to talk about Game of Thrones, but first before I get into that, I want to say that there's three different commentaries I'm doing on Game of Thrones. I'm going to label each one so you will be able to find which one you want to talk about. Now this one is called All the Foreshadowing You Missed That Bran Was Destined to Become King. And this came from Ranker, and it came out in June or July after the show had went off, and it's very interesting. So let's get started here. Okay, here we go. The series finale of Game of Thrones may have destroyed the Iron Throne itself, but that didn't mean that the position of Westerosi monarch was left vacant. Instead, it went to the unlikeliest of candidates in Bran Stark. The coronation of King Bran the Broken definitely qualifies as a plot twist of the most shocking variety. That doesn't mean that some fans didn't see it coming, and there are plenty of instances of foreshadowing throughout the series that back up their assertions. It may never be known how much of Game of Thrones' final season is made up of real plot points from George R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire, and how much is the imagination of showrunners D.B. Weiss and David Benioff. Whatever the truth may be, the naming of Bran Stark as king still fits within the series' established themes, and there have been enough hints and clues laid along the way to definitely state that this particular aspect of the conclusion wasn't just a last-minute addition. Okay, the first point is the very first episode of the series frames Bran as a king. It's unknown, as of yet, whether Bran was always intended to end up as the king of Westeros, or even if the plot point will be a part of George R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire book series whenever they see print. With that being said, there is a brief scene from the first episode of Game of Thrones that seems to suggest that Bran sitting the throne was part of the plan from the very beginning. During Ned Stark's execution of a Night's Watch deserter, he drones through all the traditional ceremonial dialogue, including mention of the deed being carried out in the name of Robert of the House of Baratheon, first of his name, King of the Andals, and the first men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, and Protector of the Realm. As he mentions Robert titles, the scene shifts to a shot of Jon Snow, which fans had long taken as a reference to Jon's own monarch future, but also of Bran Stark, who is standing right in front of Jon. With one bit of foreshadowing, the show could have been hinting at two future kings. The next point. The entire saga started with Bran Stark. The first chapter in the A Song of Ice and Fire series, aside from a prologue that introduces the others is told from Bran Stark's point of view. It's also the first part of the overall story that will one day become Game of Thrones that George R.R. Martin ever conceived of. When I began, I didn't know what the hell I had. I thought it might be a short story. It was just this chapter where they find these direwolf pups. Then I started exploring these families and the world started coming alive. It was all there in my head. I couldn't not write it. So it wasn't an entirely rational decision, but writers aren't entirely rational creatures, says George Martin. Given that Bran was central to Martin's original conception of the series, it makes sense that he will also be central to his conclusion, even if Martin didn't have the ending entirely planned out at that point. Next point. Chaos is a ladder. One of the only moments in Bran Stark's long character history that could truly be considered badass comes in Season 7 of Game of Thrones when Bran spits Peter Baelish's credo of chaos is a ladder right back in the master manipulator's face. It's a powerful scene that demonstrates to both Littlefinger and the audience just how extensive Bran's past viewing abilities have grown. But it may also be a hint at Bran's own eventual rise to power. Climbing the ladder of chaos is, after all, exactly how Bran ends up being the Lord of the Six Kingdoms. Though it is hinted that he can see the future, Bran allows for all the horrible events of the series' final season to occur, including the deaths of Daenerys Targaryen and the Lannister twins, which all but paves his way to the throne. Perhaps Bran learned a thing or two about the Game of Thrones while watching Littlefinger scheme in the past. Next point. Bran was always supposed to live in King's Landing. After a personal journey that included a trip north of the Wall and an apprenticeship with a psychic tree, it's easy to forget that Bran Stark's plot began much the way it ended, with Bran being summoned to take up residency in King's Landing. Before his paralysis at the hands of Jaime Lannister, Bran is meant to accompany his father and sisters to King's Landing as Ned becomes Hand of the King. Instead, Bran's fall and subsequent coma meant he has to stay behind at Winterfell to recuperate and wait another 8 seasons before finally making his arrival in the continent's capital. Next point. Bran is the latest in a long line of influential Brandon Starks. Bran the Broken will be the first Brandon Stark to serve as King of the Six Kingdoms, but he won't be the first Brandon Stark to serve as king. Before Aegon's conquest put most of Westeros under Targaryen rule, the North was an independent kingdom, one that had been ruled over for centuries by successful Stark kings in the north. Among those Stark monarchs were several Brandon Starks, including such notables as Bran the Breaker, Bran the Shipwright, and Bran the Burner. None were as significant, however, as Bran the Builder, the man who supposedly founded the Stark family, who built the wall and then went on to construct half the castles in Westeros. In other words, Bran the Broken might be the first Bran Stark to rule from King's Landing, but he's not the first to have a major impact on the continent. Next point, the theme of the best rulers not wanting to rule definitely applies to Bran. An often repeated theme of Game of Thrones is that the best rulers are often those who don't want to rule at all. While the dark side of this is visible in the reign of Robert Baratheon, Jon Snow's reluctance to take the Iron Throne is said by many as a key reason why he would make the perfect king. And if that's true for Jon, it's doubly true for Bran Stark. Earlier in season 8, Bran tells Tyrion Lannister that I don't really want anymore, in reference to his growing in humanity. If a desire for power really is the bane of all rulers in Westeros, then who better to reign over the continent than the three-eyed raven, a being literally unable to feel desire. Next point. Tyrion Lannister has helped Bran gain a seat before. Tyrion Lannister is falsely accused of hiring the assassin that tried to take Bran Stark's life while he lay in a coma. But Tyrion actually did as much to help Bran's recovery as anyone else. After returning from the wall, Tyrion connects with Bran over their mutual status as outsiders. Countless characters in the saga are doomed by their own emotions, and that's true of those who sit on the Iron Throne. Mad King Aerys is destroyed by his paranoia. Robert grows bitter due to regret. Joffrey is too cruel. Tommen is too naive. And Cersei is as self-centered as it gets. In other words, every past monarch of Westeros was driven to their downfall by some sort of emotion-based character flaw, and there's only one character in the entire saga who can no longer fall victim to their emotions. Has an emotionless shell of a being that is only, quote, almost, end quote, a man. Bran Stark might just qualify as the only sort of ruler that can break the doomed cycle that Martin has created, a heart that can no longer be in conflict with itself. Okay, that's going to do it for me. But first I want to just say that Bran the Shipwright Is Bran the builder?